I work night security at a museum. One exhibit never stays put. It was just a part-time job. Night security at a local history museum. Sounds boring, right? And it was. Silence. Dim light. The silly sound of footsteps through empty halls. Perfect. For studying for exams. And getting paid for it. The first couple of weeks. I really enjoyed it. I'd wander the halls. Check the windows. And then lock myself in my little cubicle with my computer screens. Drink cheap coffee. Or study textbooks. The problem started in the third week. Our museum. With its dusty stuffed animals. Peasant utensils. And displays of Soviet badges. Was overwhelmed. But there was one hall that gave me goosebumps. Even during the day. The Hall of Ancient Cultures. In the middle of it. On a massive granite pedestal. Stood a statue. Its official title is in the catalog. The Mourning One from Mound S. Carved from dark stone. The female figure is wrapped in a polokan. Her face hidden in a deep hood. Only the lower part was visible. Her tightly pressed lips and pointed chin. Her posture was strange. She seemed slightly hunched over. And she held her hands to her chest. As if she were cold. I first noticed it on Tuesday morning. Before handing over to Uncle Valerie's day guard, I made my final rounds. And it seemed the statue was positioned oddly. Not centered on the pedestal. But slightly to the left. On Wednesday, the story repeated itself. To the left again. And I was already on edge. On Thursday morning, I came into the hall with a tape measure. And began measuring exactly 3 meters and 15 centimeters. On Friday morning, exactly 15 centimeters. It had moved exactly 3 meters. I approached Uncle Valerie. Listen, are they doing anything about the offending statue? Maybe they're restoring it. Moving it? Uncle Valerie looked at me like I was an idiot. Lyok. What's wrong? No one had touched it since the museum opened. It's only 10. Weighing 300 kilograms. And a crane had lifted it. Who would move it? But the numbers, weren't lying. The alarms were silent. The motion sensors in the hall weren't triggering. And the cameras were empty. That same night, I decided to put an end to this paranoia. I had an old action camera. And I attached it with double-sided tape to the penal colony across the street, pointing it directly at the statue. I turned on recording, set it to night mode, and went to my little room. All night, I stared at the monitor, drank coffee, and tried not to think about what was happening in the dark room. In the morning I picked up the camera. The statue, as expected, was back there, 3 meters to the left. I brought the flash drive back to my little room, plugged it into my laptop, and turned it on. The first few hours of recording, nothing. Grainy black and white images, motionless figures on a pedestal, time code in the corner. The screen flashed forward, and then, at the 328 mark, it happened. I still can't find the words to describe the horror. The statue's head began to turn, slowly, millimeter by millimeter. The hooded stone head turned toward the camera, toward me. I gripped the table. It took about an hour, to turn the head about 40 degrees. When it stopped, it seemed to me that it was now looking directly at me, through the lens, through the wall, straight into my soul. I sat there for about 10 minutes, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen, and then it started moving. It didn't move. It was like someone moving a heavy cabinet. It lifted slightly, literally a couple of millimeters, and then slid to the side. A soft, almost inaudible grinding sound was heard. The dry, disgusting sound of stone scraping against stone. Then another shift. And another. She moved jerkily, with long pauses, slowly sliding down the center of the pedestal. At 4:48, she disappeared completely from the frame. The camera showed the empty pedestal. This went on for almost an hour, and I stared at this empty space where she had been. What she was doing in the dark hall. And at 5:40, she returned, also slowly dragging herself along the stone. She crawled back into the frame, and froze in her place. Exactly 3 meters to the left. She froze and did not move anymore. I showed the recording to the head of security. He looked at it and said it was cheap editing. He told me to stop messing around. He didn't even watch it to the end. Uncle Valera just twirled his finger at his temple. No one believed me. From that night on, everything changed. And I couldn't sit quietly in my little room anymore. Every shift I went out on patrol, and every time I passed the Hall of Ancient Cultures, I felt her gaze on me. Before she'd looked somewhere at the floor. Now I could physically feel her stone face, hidden under her hood, turning to follow me. I walked down the hallway, a chill running down my spine. Someone was watching me like that. I started talking to myself, constantly glancing over my shoulder. Sleep almost completely disappeared. I'd come home and stare blankly at the ceiling, replaying that sound in my head. Another week passed. Every night I left the camera, and every night I saw the same thing. A turn of the head, a slow, agonizing slide from the pedestal, an hour of absence, and then a return to a new place. On that fateful night, I was sitting in my canteen as usual, staring at the monitors. One screen showed standard surveillance cameras, the other the feed from my camera. 3:15. She began to turn her head, but this time not toward the camera. She was turning it toward the hall exit, toward the corridor that led straight to me. Everything inside me collapsed. 3:40. She began to move, but not sideways as usual. She crawled forward, straight from the pedestal, onto the marble floor. There was a dull thud that seemed to shake the walls. The vibration sensor on the wall blinked red, but the alarm didn't go off, and she crawled across the floor, straight toward the hall exit. The scraping became louder, more distinct. Now I heard it not only in the recording, but in person. It reached me along the empty, deep corridors. Dry, disgusting, scratchy. I stared at the monitor, mesmerized. The figure slowly crossed the hall, and disappeared through the doorway leading to the main corridor. Now I saw it on the main security camera, a long dark shadow, slowly creeping down the corridor towards me. I jumped up and checked the lock on the door. A steel door. A secure bolt. I felt like a rat in a cage. She was already 10 meters from my door. The quality of the camera in the corridor was not very good, but I saw her moving. 5 meters, and at the moment she should have entered the field of view of the camera directly above my door. The monitor hissed and went dark. White noise, and I was left in darkness, lit only by the flickering static on the screen. Rather, it stopped. There was absolute ringing silence. She was right behind the door. I hid in the farthest corner of the closet, covering my ears with my hands, and then I heard a knock. Quiet. Muffled. It was the hard, heavy thud of stone on steel. She knocked on my door. I sat on the cold floor and cried like a child, waiting for the steel door to burst open, but it didn't. After a while the knocking stopped. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. An empty hallway. I waited another hour until I heard Uncle Valera's footsteps. When he opened the lock from the outside with his key, I almost threw my arms around his neck. Lek, why did you lock yourself in? I knocked and knocked. I didn't answer. Gathering the remains of my willpower, I went into the hall. She stood in her place, in the very center of the pedestal, as if nothing had happened. I walked closer, and her posture had changed. Previously she had pressed her hands to her chest. Now her fingers, carved from black stone, were spread out, as if she wanted to hug or grab someone. That same day, I wrote a letter of release. A week passed. I tried to live a normal life, went to classes, met with friends, but every night I dreamed of this knock. A dull, stony knock on the door, and then the package arrived. A small cardboard box, wrapped in tape. I opened it right there in the kitchen. Inside, on a cotton pad, lay a postcard and some object. I took the postcard first. On the front was a photograph, the main hall of our museum. My heart sank, and I turned it over. On the back were written just a few words. Do you miss me? I do. And under the inscription was just one letter. My hands shook, and I looked down at the object in the box. It was a small figurine, about 10 centimeters tall, a perfect copy of that very statue, crafted down to the smallest detail, the same dark stone, the same hood, hiding its face. I took it in my hands, and it was cold. Its tiny stone hands were stretched forward, as if it wanted to hug me. There is a door in the wall of my new apartment, but it does not lead into a room, but into someone's house, somewhere far away. I moved into my first own apartment. The previous owners were a sweet elderly couple, who simply moved in with their children, leaving behind the smell of mothballs. I'll strip everything down to the last brick, and make a loft, I thought enthusiastically, peeling back the first layer of paper from the past. The work proceeded cheerfully, accompanied by music from the speaker. The putty knife creaked, and pieces of wallpaper and plaster flew to the floor. And then, on the main wall in the living room, the putty knife suddenly hit something hard. I tapped my fingers. The sound was different, not dull, like brickwork, but hollow, as if there was a cavity behind the wall. I took a hammer and carefully, trying not to make too much noise, began tapping out the outline. A rectangle. A clear, even rectangle the size of a door. According to the apartment plan, there was no door there. The wall was monolithic, load-bearing. The neighboring apartment was on the other side of the building. I chipped away a piece of plaster. Then another, dark, almost black wood, was revealed beneath the layer of plaster. It was a door, an old one, with a massive brass handle. It had been bricked up on the outside, and then covered with plaster. Someone really wanted it to never be opened. I raked aside the bricks, which fortunately were laid with weak mortar, and gave way easily. I cleaned the handle and pulled. With a terrible creaking sound that sent a chill down my spine, it swung open. I expected to see a storage room, a dark closet, anything, but behind the door was no room. There was a house, a different house. I stood in my dilapidated living room, and looked into the dimly lit hallway. An oval mirror hung there, and a table stood beneath it. On the floor lay a rug with oriental patterns. The air from there was different. It didn't smell of construction and dust, like mine. It smelled of old wood, dampness, and something else. I slammed the door. What was this? A passage to an abandoned part of the house. But by all accounts, there was nothing behind that wall. A week passed. I convinced myself it was just an abandoned utility room that everyone had forgotten about. I even opened it again a couple of times. The picture didn't change. The same dusty hallway, the same dim light from the depths of the house. Absolutely dead silence. I called out once. Hey, is anyone there? Only an echo answered, but I began to notice details. For example, there was a portrait of a woman in a dark dress hanging on the wall. Her eyes in the portrait were scratched out, and the smell, it grew stronger when the door was opened. The smell of damp earth, an old perfume. I decided that I would finish the renovation, and simply seal the door back up, tightly, fill it with concrete, if necessary. But then I started to hear, at night, when I was already in bed, a quiet, single creaking sound came from the living room. This creaking sounded only when I was in complete silence. It was as if someone was waiting for me to stop making noise, so they could take one cautious step. Then the creaking was joined by a barely audible rustling sound, like someone running a hand over a dusty surface. Every night I lay and listened to the darkness of my apartment, trying to figure out where these sounds were coming from. They were always there, behind the door. I felt like I was being watched. Even during the day, when I was working, I felt someone's gaze on my back. I turned around to the empty room, but the feeling didn't go away. It was coming from the wall, from the door. I stopped opening it, at all. I moved a heavy bookcase against it, but it didn't help. The sounds grew louder. Now I could hear footsteps, leisurely, shuffling steps on the wooden floor. Someone was walking through that house. One night, I woke up to a knock. 3 distinct, slow knocks on my door, from the other side. After that knock that night, I bought foam, cement, everything I needed to seal this passage. I moved the bookcase. But before I started, I don't know why, I pressed the handle one last time. The door opened, and I saw that on the table under the mirror, where there had once been only dust, there was now something. A small object. I couldn't see it. And then the most idiotic and terrible idea of the sweet by seas. The shumite. I reached out and placed the lighter on the dusty floor of that house, then stepped back and slammed the door. Why did I do that? I don't know. It was some kind of experiment. But for the first time in a long time, I slept like a log, probably from nervous exhaustion. In the morning, I woke up with a clear feeling that something was wrong in the apartment. The air was different, and that same rotten smell was now in my body. I rushed into the living room. The door was closed, but on my coffee table sat a small bird carved from dark wood. I went closer. The workmanship was crude, yet strangely elegant. The bird had no eyes, just two empty sockets. The wood was cold and smooth. I rushed to the door and flung it open. Looking at the floor, my lighter was gone. It had been an exchange. It had taken my thing and given me its own. It had crossed a line. I looked at the wooden bird and was frozen with horror. It was proof that someone was there. I grabbed that little bird, wanted to throw it away, burn it, but I couldn't. Something stopped me, and I simply shoved it into the far drawer of my desk, and tried to forget about it. But now I knew the wall was no longer an obstacle. I constantly checked to see if my things were where they were. It seemed to me that they were slightly misaligned, that a book was lying on the wrong side. Maybe I was just going crazy, and I decided to do one last stupid thing. I decided to look, not just peek, but wait for it to appear. That night, I turned off all the lights in the apartment, except for the night light in the hallway, sat on a chair opposite the door, leaving it ajar, created the same semi-darkness in my room, as there was there, and waited. An hour, two, nothing, only silence and a smell. I was just about to give up, and then, deep in that house, a shadow flickered in the doorway, and it froze. It was just a dark silhouette against an even darker background. Tall, slightly stooped. I couldn't make out his face or clothes, just a figure. I was scared. We were looking at each other. Slowly, as if in a dream, I raised my right hand, and after a second's delay, the silhouette also raised its hand. Its right. My breath caught in my throat. It was like a reflection in an old crooked mirror. I slowly shook my head to the left, and the silhouette, with the same delay, repeated my movement. For a second, I felt almost less scared. It was like a game, a strange, silent dialogue. I lowered my hand, sat there for a few seconds, and the silhouette lowered its own, and then I did something that changed everything. I forced a timid smile, just to see what would happen. The silhouette didn't move, it simply stood motionless. Nothing happened, and at that moment, when I had already stopped waiting, a thin white line appeared, where the face should have been. It slowly stretched and curved upward. It was a smile, a wide, unnatural, creepy smile. I slammed the door with a scream, and collapsed to the floor. The very next day, I found a locksmith, and had him install the most powerful lock they could find into that damned door. The locksmith, a gloomy elderly man, clicked his tongue for a long time, looking at the old door in the wall, but didn't argue with me. When he finished and handed me the key, I double-locked the lock. I no longer heard footsteps, no rustling. The smell had almost disappeared. I started sleeping at night. A week passed, and one evening I was sitting in the living room, drinking tea, and suddenly I heard a soft sound, a scraping, metallic scraping from the door. Someone was fiddling with the lock. It was trying to hide my lock. I was terrified. The sound stopped. There was silence, and then I heard a quiet, methodical tapping, then the sound of a drill. Right next to my lock, it was installing its own, and then I heard one last sound. Click, click, the sound of a lock closing, from the other side. We've been living like this, ever since. I locked it out, and it locked me out. We've trapped each other. I can't sell the apartment and move out. I can't leave this door. Sometimes at night, I hear the handle on my side slowly turning all the way to the stop, and then returning. It's testing. And sometimes, when the house is completely quiet, I hear a different sound, a quiet metallic clang. That's it testing its key, in its keyhole. We've locked each other out, or from each other. You've already started playing. There will be footsteps at night. Hide at 3:33, and don't breathe. It all started with a simple cleaning. My parents went to the dacha for the whole weekend, leaving me alone in our old two-story house. Sort out the junk in the attic, my mom said as we parted. There's no more room there, I promised, of course, even though my plan was to lazily lie around and watch TV series. But by Saturday evening, my conscience had finally gotten the better of me. Our attic was a classic, dusty one, cluttered with boxes of old clothes and other junk. I turned on the old ceiling lamp, and it flooded the space with a yellowish light. I methodically rearranged the boxes, sorting them into categories for toss and keep. And then, in the farthest darkest corner, I stumbled upon it. A small, unremarkable wooden box, the size of a Sabuna box. It had no lock, covered in a thin layer of dust. Strange, I'd never seen it before. I dragged it closer to the light, blew off the dust, and carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay a neatly folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age, and 2 dice. They were made of something like darkened bone, smoothly polished, heavy and cold. Instead of the usual dots, strange symbols unfamiliar to me were carved into the edges. A spiral. An eye. A crescent moon. A crossed-out cross. Something like lightning. And a blank edge. I unfolded the piece of paper. The text was handwritten. These were the rules. Rules of the game. First, roll the dice once a day after sunset. Second, whatever you get is your test for the night. Third, never refuse to roll. Fourth, don't try to get rid of the game. Fifth, don't tell anyone about the rules. At the bottom was a note, written in the same ink. The game is just beginning. I grinned. Some kind of prank. Or maybe my great-grandfather was a fan of strange board games. I turned the dice over in my hands. A silly thought occurred to me. Why not? The evening was boring, and at least this was some kind of entertainment. Without thinking twice, I shook the dice in my palms and threw them onto the dusty floor. They thudded dully against the wood and fell silent. One showed an eye symbol, the other a crescent moon. Nothing happened. I shrugged, feeling a little stupid. I put the dice and rules back in the box and put it in a prominent place, deciding to show my parents tomorrow. After finishing cleaning, I went downstairs, ate, and collapsed into a movie. I fell asleep right away. I woke up in the middle of the night with an inexplicable sense of unease. A ringing silence filled my ears. I glanced at the clock on my phone. For some reason my heart started beating faster. I listened. The house was quiet. Even the crickets outside the window were silent. And then I heard it, rustling. The sound came from the first floor. I clutched the blanket. Footsteps slowly ascended the stairs. Each step creaked, and each creak echoed in my chest like an icy hammer. Someone was in the house. But how did they get in? The door was double locked. I checked before going to bed. The footsteps died away right outside my door. I stopped breathing. The lines from the letter I found in the box flashed in my head. There will be footsteps at night. Suddenly, cold air seeped through the crack in the door, smelling of damp earth and rot. I stared at the door, waiting for the handle to turn, but nothing happened. Just silence. And then I heard a quiet, distinct knock, like someone throwing dice on the floor. The sound came from right outside the door, and then silence again. I glanced at my watch. 3:33. Hide. 3:33. And don't breathe. Instinct worked faster than reason. I rolled out of bed, hiding in the farthest corner. The doorknob slowly creaked downwards. The door opened slightly. I felt someone's gaze. The cold that pierced my bones became almost unbearable. I closed my eyes, trying with all my might not to breathe. And then I heard a quiet thud. Teaver had closed. Footsteps just as slow and shuffling began to retreat down the stairs, through the first floor, and silence. I crawled out from under the bed only in the early morning. I was shaking all over. The whole next day I walked around like a zombie. I checked all the locks, all the windows. Everything was in place. No sign of forced entry. I went up to the attic. The box was where I'd left it. I opened it. The dice and the rules were inside. I wanted to splatter the box, burn it. But the line from the rules seared itself into my brain, without trying to get rid of the game. What would happen if I broke this rule? That evening, as the sun was setting again, I realized I had no choice. My hands were shaking, but I picked up the dice. I had to roll. I rolled them. I chose the spiral, and the blank side. What did that mean? I had no idea. The rules didn't provide any explanation. All I could do was wait. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, and turned on all the lights in the room. The clock on the wall ticked, counting down the seconds until my sentence. Exactly at 3:33, it all started again. Footsteps on the first floor, climbing the stairs. Silence behind the door. But this time, everything was different. I didn't hide. Instead, I looked at the objects in my room. My gaze was fixed on the glass of water on the nightstand. It slowly, millimeter by millimeter, moved toward the edge. I sat, watching this unnatural movement. The glass reached the very edge, froze for a moment, and fell to the floor with a crash, shattering into hundreds of pieces. Then a book on the shelf shifted. Then a photo frame on the table. The objects came to life. They moved on their own, slowly, purposefully, as if an invisible hand were rearranging them. It was like Poltergeist from the movies, and all the while, that same sound came from behind the door, as if my invisible opponent were throwing the dice again and again, determining his next move in this nightmarish game. This went on for several nights. Every night a new throw, a new test, a crossed-out cross and lightning. The house was lit by gas, and in the darkness I heard a whisper calling my name. A crescent moon and lightning. The mirrors in the house were coated in icy frost, reflecting something dark and shapeless, standing behind me. I didn't sleep well. One night, dizzy with fear and lack of sleep, I made a mistake. I forgot to hide. I didn't know what it meant, but the premonition was the worst. The footsteps behind the door faded. The doorknob turned, and the door creaked open. It stood there. I can't describe it. My mind simply refused to piece together what I saw. It was tall, taller than the doorway, and thin to the point of unnaturalness. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at impossible angles. He had no face, just smooth, worn skin with nothing on it. And the moment our gazes, his and mine, met, invisible, I realized I'd broken another unwritten rule. I couldn't look at him. He took a slow, silent step into the room, and then, right before my eyes, on the old rule sheet lying on the table, new words began to appear. A new rule. He's come for you. He won't leave until one of you closes your eyes. Win, when he falls asleep. Lose if you close your eyes first. A staring contest. The scariest staring contest of my life. The monster stopped in the middle of the room, and we simply stared at each other, and I saw something moving, rolling, like a coiled snake, beneath his smooth skin. The cold emanating from him was physically palpable. It seemed to suck not only the warmth out of the room, but the very air itself. I tried not to blink, but my eyes began to water, ache and burn. My eyelids felt like lead. I widened them to their limits. What would happen if I blinked? if I closed my eyes first. The thought of it sent adrenaline surging through my blood, driving away drowsiness. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. Seconds stretched into minutes. The creature didn't move. It simply stood there and stared at me. My eyes burned with hellish fire. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't dare wipe them away. The image before my eyes began to swim, disintegrating into colorful spots, and I felt my eyelids growing heavy, like an irresistible force pulling them down. I pinched my leg in desperation, trying to clear the fog that had clouded my consciousness. I can't sleep. I can't close my eyes. And then I noticed something. On the creature's smooth head, where the eyes should have been, the skin began to tremble slightly. At first, barely noticeable. Then more and more. He's getting tired too. He's playing by the rules too. I began to speak to him mentally. You'll lose, you'll leave. I'm stronger. The creature swayed slightly, its long arms hanging by its sides trembling faintly. Did I win? No, not yet. The struggle continued. My eyes were practically blinded by the haze of tears and pain. I was hanging on by a single preamble. I won't give up. And suddenly it began to settle. Slowly. Smoothly. As if air were being released from the sky. Its figure lost its shape, becoming lower, smaller. It turned into a dark puddle on the parquet floor. The puddle retracted and disappeared. With it, the cold disappeared. The room became warm again. I collapsed on the bed, unable even to cry. I won. I don't remember how I fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the day from the bright sun. My body ached, as if I'd been beaten all night. My head felt like cast iron. The first thing I did was look at the table. The sheet of paper with the rule was still there. The new lines of the emerging night were still there. This wasn't a dream. I felt devastated, squeezed out to the last drop. And the worst thing was, I knew that the next night it would all repeat itself. A new throw, a new test. And so it is. Every night I play, I've learned to hide in 333 and hold my breath, bringing myself almost to fainting. Sometimes I hit the jackpot. 2 identical symbols, an I and an I. Then he comes and we play the staring contest again. Sometimes I win. Then he disappears and I get a break. The next night there are no steps. But sometimes I lose. I don't remember how it happens. Just at some point the strength leaves me, and I fall asleep right before his eyes. I wake up in the morning on my bed. Nothing hurts. My parents are back. I try to act normal, but they notice something is wrong with me. I can't tell them. And who would believe me? They just lock me up in a mental hospital. I open the old cow in the attic. It had the rules of the game and dice. I thought it was just an old dusty thing. But in reality, I opened the door, and now I can't close it. Every evening, when the sun touches the horizon, I pick up 2 cold dice. The game goes on.